A federal high court in Abuja just dropped a judgment that could redraw Nigeria's entire political map ahead of 2027. One ruling, one judge, and overnight, every politician who lost in the APC primaries, every senator, every governor's ally, every heavyweight who was crushed by the machine woke up this morning with a second chance. The question is not whether people will leave the APC. The question is how many, how fast, and whether Tinubu's political fortress can survive the stampede. I am about to break this down in a way you will not hear anywhere else. Stay with me. I have spent decades studying Nigerian electoral law, party mechanics, and the invisible architecture of power in this country. And I am telling you, this judgment is not just legal news. This is a political earthquake. Today on Unfiltered Report HQ, we are going deep into the Federal High Court ruling that has just nullified core sections of INEC's 2027 election timetable. What it means legally, what it means for the APC, who benefits, who panics, and what happens next in Nigeria's political drama. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what the court said, why it matters constitutionally, and why I believe we are about to witness one of the most dramatic political reshuffles Nigeria has seen since 2015. If you are serious about understanding what is really happening in Nigerian politics, not the spin, not the propaganda, not the party press releases, you are in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell right now, because what I am about to take you through in the next 20 minutes is the kind of analysis that changes how you read every political headline from this day forward. You deserve to know the truth. Subscribe. Let us go. Let me take you back to February 26, 2026. INEC, under its chairman, released what it called the revised timetable and schedule of activities for the 2027 general election. On paper, it looks like standard electoral administration, the kind of documents that gets published, filed away, and forgotten. But buried inside that timetable were provisions that political insiders immediately recognized as a political weapon. The timetable compressed the deadlines for party primaries into a narrow window. It set strict deadlines for the submission of candidates' particulars. And critically, it effectively slammed shut the door on any politician who lost a primary and wanted to defect to another party and contest the same office. Under the framework, parties had to comply with election schedules designed to culminate in presidential and National Assembly elections on January 16, 2027, and governorship elections on February 6, 2027. Now, here is what the Electoral Act 2026 actually says, and this is where the law and INEC's timetable began to collide. Section 29, subsection 1 of the Electoral Act 2026 gives political parties the right to submit candidates' particulars up to 120 days before an election. 120 days. INEC's timetable shortened that window. And that, as Justice Muhammad Umar would rule this week, was an overreach. The law simply does not permit. Now, who filed this suit? Because this matters. The case marked FHC ABJ/CS/517/2026 was filed by the Youth Party, not APC, not PDP, not a major political titan, a smaller party. And yet, its judgment has implications that reach all the way to Aso Rock. That alone should tell you something about how Nigerian electoral law works. Sometimes it is the smallest voice that changes everything.
Justice M.G. Umar delivered his verdict on Wednesday, May 21, 2026. The judgment gutted key parts of INEC's revised timetable. Here is the core legal finding translated from legalese into power language. INEC has the power to observe and monitor primaries. INEC does not have the power to dictate when those primaries happen. That is the line the court drew, and INEC crossed it. The court declared that while INEC has a supervisory role over elections, it cannot prescribe binding timelines that regulate how and when political parties conduct their internal primaries. That power sits with the Electoral Act, not with INEC's administrative timetable. The court also ruled that INEC cannot shorten the 120-day window for candidate submission guaranteed under Section 29, subsection 1 of the Electoral Act 2026. Any attempt by INEC to compress that timeline through its own administrative schedule is, in the words of the judgment, inconsistent with the provisions of the Electoral Act, and therefore void. And here is where the political heat comes in. That 120-day window is precisely what was being used to lock political losers inside their parties. If you lost a primary in APC and the defection deadline had already passed under INEC's compressed schedule, you are trapped. No second chance. No alternative platform. The court just unlocked that trap.
Now let me challenge the popular narrative. Because everyone, and I mean everyone, is missing something. People are framing this purely as a legal victory for party autonomy. And yes, technically, it is. But I want you to think deeper. Why was INEC's timetable designed the way it was? Who benefits from locking primary losers inside the APC? The APC conducted primaries under option A4, a direct primary system across the country, and the results were brutal for some very powerful people. Ovi Omoageje, former Deputy Senate President, was crushed in Delta Central by Ede Dafinun. The score? 116,252 votes to 3,643. That is not a defeat. That is annihilation. Ned Nkoku, senator, billionaire, husband of Regina Daniels, lost Delta North to Ifeanyi Okowa, former governor, by 113,309 votes to 2,612. Again, not even close. Daily Post is reporting that more than 50 serving reps and senators lost their APC tickets. 50. And these are not anonymous politicians. These are people with resources, networks, and the motivation to fight back. Under INEC's original timetable, their only legal option was to swallow the loss and stay in APC. Under this court ruling, the exit door is now wide open. Let us be very precise here. 3 legal instruments are in play. First, the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as amended, which guarantees freedom of association, including the right to join and leave political parties. Second, the Electoral Act 2026, specifically Section 29, Subclause 1, which sets the 120-day candidate submission window and provisions governing INEC's supervisory powers over primaries. Third, INEC's revised timetable and schedule of activities for the 2027 general election issued February 26, 2026, which the court has now struck down in key parts. The court's holding is clean and precise. INEC's powers under the Electoral Act extend to receiving notices of primaries and observing the process. They do not extend to prescribing the timeline for when those primaries must occur. That is a function of the Electoral Act itself, not INEC's administrative discretion. The court also struck down INEC's campaign end date. The Commission had tried to end campaigns 2 days before elections. Justice Umar ruled that INEC does not possess the statutory authority under the Electoral Act 2026 to fix that deadline either. What does this mean practically? INEC must now go back to the drawing board. A revised timetable must be issued, one that conforms to the statutory periods already guaranteed in the Electoral Act. And here is something you need to know, that 14 political parties have already announced they will extend their internal election timetables to accommodate new defectors under this ruling. The APC is the only major party that has already completed most of its primaries. The presidential primary is all that remains. Every other party right now has legal room to extend its window and recruit those APC losers who are about to come knocking. Drop your take in the comments right now. Tell me, do you think Omoageje and Ned Nwoko will defect? And if they do, which party do they go to? Because in the next section, I am going to tell you what I think is actually behind all of this, and it has very little to do with the law and everything to do with 2027 and who controls the next Senate. Comment below. I am watching. This ruling did not happen in a vacuum. Let me show you the political architecture underneath it. The suit was filed by the Youth Party, a relatively small opposition party. But read the language of the ADC's response carefully. The African Democratic Congress said, and I am paraphrasing their statement, "We believed at the time that that particular restriction was designed to prevent people from leaving the ruling APC." Let that sink in. Opposition parties are openly stating that INEC's compressed timetable was a mechanism to protect APC's membership. Whether or not that was INEC's intention is a separate argument, but the political effect was identical. It trapped APC primary losers inside the party with no legal escape route before nomination deadlines. Now think about who loses most from APC internal elections conducted under a rigged or managed primary system. It is not the small, unknown politicians. It is the governors, former deputies, senators, billionaires, the people with enough resources to mount a real challenge on an opposition platform. The APC has just completed primaries where 50-plus sitting lawmakers lost their tickets. These are people with constituencies, money, and grudges. The INEC timetable was, consciously or not, the lock on the cage, keeping them inside. The court just broke that lock. And what about the 2027 implications? The presidential primary of APC has not yet been conducted. Tinubu has not yet been officially returned as the APC flag bearer. And now we have a court judgment that disrupts the entire pre-election schedule and gives INEC's critics ammunition to argue the entire process must be reset. Watch what happens in the next 30 to 60 days. Watch which senators and reps quietly begin testing the waters in PDP, Labour Party, ADC, or the new Nigerian People's Party. Watch which governors who feel squeezed inside APC begin to recalculate. The tectonic plates of Nigerian politics are shifting, and this judgment was the tremor that started it. Nigeria is not the first African country to face this tension between electoral commissions and political party autonomy. In Kenya, the IEBC, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, faced similar legal challenges in the run-up to the 2022 elections, when aspirants challenged nomination processes and party timelines. What we saw there was that compressed timelines and administrative overreach by electoral bodies consistently produce political instability, not order. In Senegal, the Constitutional Council's intervention in the 2024 election cycle, which ultimately delayed the election itself, showed Africa and the world that electoral bodies that exceed their legal mandates create not just legal crises, but legitimacy crises. Citizens stop trusting the process, and when citizens stop trusting the process, chaos fills the vacuum. Nigeria's Electoral Commission has, over time, built credibility precisely by staying within its legal lane, being an umpire, not a player. That is the lesson Nigeria must learn.
INEC must be an administrator of elections, not a political choreographer of outcomes. The continent is watching Nigeria. As Africa's largest democracy, how we handle this ruling will either strengthen or further erode confidence in Nigerian electoral institutions across the region. Let me give you 3 scenarios, and I am going to be direct about what I think is most likely. Scenario 1. INEC appeals the judgment, but simultaneously issues a revised timetable that complies with the court's directives. A number of high-profile APC losers, including names like Omoageje and Inwoko, defect to opposition parties with manageable disruption. APC absorbs the shock, presidential primary proceeds, Tinubu is returned as flag-bearer, the party machinery survives but is visibly weakened, especially in Delta and South-South. Scenario 2. This is the scenario that should keep APC leadership up at night. With the legal constraint lifted, 50-plus primary losers fan out across opposition parties. Their departure takes with them local structures, financial networks, and ward-level loyalty. PDP, Labour Party, and ADC absorb the most significant figures. Multiple states that APC carried in 2023, particularly in the South-South and Southeast, become genuinely competitive. Tinubu's re-election path narrows significantly. Scenario 3. INEC, under sustained legal and political pressure, issues an entirely new timetable. This creates space for parties that have not yet completed primaries to reopen their processes and recruit fresh defectors. The 2027 election calendar itself gets pushed. This is the least likely scenario, but the most destabilizing, and the opposition parties know it, which is why 14 of them are already positioning for exactly this outcome.
Here is my verdict, and I am not going to sit on the fence. This judgment is one of the most consequential pre-election rulings in Nigeria's Fourth Republic, not because it breaks new constitutional ground, it does not, but because it arrived at precisely the moment when the APC had hundreds of wounded, humiliated, and resource-rich politicians trapped inside its walls with nowhere to go. INEC overreached, the court corrected it. That is how the rule of law is supposed to work, and I commend Justice Umar for having the courage to call it exactly as the law demands. But let us be clear about what this really is. This is not just a legal correction. This is a political detonation. The APC built a timetable that was by design or by effect a containment strategy. That containment has now been ruled unconstitutional. And in Nigerian politics, when the fence comes down, people run. The APC does not just have a legal problem this morning. It has a loyalty problem, a momentum problem, and a 2027 problem. And the opposition knows it. Watch the next 60 days very carefully. Watch who moves. Watch where they go. Watch which governors make quiet phone calls to opposition national chairmen. Because the verdict from Abuja this week did not just nullify a timetable, it opened a door. And in Nigerian politics, when a door like that opens, it never closes quietly. My name is Sam. This is Unfiltered Report HQ. Uncompromised, unscripted, unfiltered. Share this video right now with someone who needs to understand what is really happening in Nigeria ahead of 2027. Not the spin, the real thing. And if you want my next deep dive, I am going into the APC presidential primary and what the delegate math really looks like for Tinubu. Make sure you are subscribed because that one drops very soon. The conversation does not end here. It starts with you. Share it. Pass it on. This is Unfiltered Report HQ.